as I'm driving, I would say to myself, laugh at something, sing to the radio. Like, don't let them know how sad you are. And when I drive back after dropping them off, I always pass an underpass, and I would think to myself, what if I turn the wheel just a little bit to the right? What if I step on the gas? Would it be quick? Would it hurt? Would they be better off without me? I did that for 2 years.
Move over, baby boomers. It's time for Gen XYZ. It's time to stop waiting on the world to change. It's time to be the change. It's time to stop thinking about how your life can be better. It's time to start taking action, massive action to improve your life. Join Zach Winter and Marcadair Rios every week as we learn how others had the grit, determination, and conviction to 10x their lives, and as we explore ways that can help you 10x your life.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of the 10X for Gen XYZ podcast. I'm Zach Winter.
And I'm Marcadair Rios.
And today, as our guest, we're happy to have Marcy Warhap. And Marcy recently published her memoir titled The Good Stripper, a soccer mom's memoir of lies, loss, and lap dances. And in it, she talks about how she went from being a good girl from a nice family to a woman who was living kind of a secret double life, trying to be the perfect housewife by day and then a dancer, town vixen, while her kids were sleeping and at school. And she's faced kind of lots of trauma earlier in her life too that I think we'll get into. But she was incredibly resilient and able to bounce back past all of that and reclaim her life. And now she gives back by helping others overcome their struggles. So we're happy to have you on the podcast, Marcy.
I am happy to be here.
Hi, Marcy.
Looking forward to chatting. Hi.
Yeah. Let's start by talking a little bit about your background. I know you had some kind of traumatic experiences with your childhood, and that probably impact your life later on. So maybe we can start with your childhood and your background.
Well, I'll tell you, my childhood, when I look back, I think I had a really good childhood. Like, it started off, I was part of a family of 5, my parents, an older brother, older sister, I guess sort of middle class. I was very active. I was into sports. I was into dancing and singing and always doing shows at school and for the community. And I was very close with my mother and my brother. And I felt very loved and very safe and protected. And I was always a very outspoken kid. I talked in my book how I think it was grade 1. I wrote a petition about one of my teachers who was being really rough with the boys and got everyone to sign it. And then the teacher called my house and apologized and changed. And I learned that, you have a voice and you have a right to use it. And my mother was great like that. Like, she really would tell me all the time, she'd say, you're really beautiful, but more than that, you're smart and you're interesting. And I really like what you have to say. And that was huge. So everything should have been great. And I was on this path to take over the world. And then life said, not so fast. And I would say the first thing, which really wasn't, it was difficult but not traumatic, was my parents got divorced when I was 10 and my father left. And at the time, it was tough because I was the first kid in my school whose parents got divorced. So it wasn't a thing. School didn't know what to do with me on Father's Day. And that was to other kids didn't know what to do. And it was tough because my father, he left and that was it. There was no child support. There was no spousal support. There was no anything. Left the province.
Did you see your dad after?
At the very beginning, and my mother, I have to say, my mother ended it because he was just being terrible. But he took me out, my brother and sister and I, for breakfast one day when I was 10 and said, do you want a relationship with me? And my sister, who was 17, said no, because he was up to some bad stuff. And so I said no, because she said no. And my brother, who was 15, he said yes. But I think my father was looking for an excuse I think he was hoping I'll say no. And he just took it like that. And that was it. He took off. At first, when I first played, he would pick me up on weekends. And either he'd call me right before and say, you know what, I was going to take you to the baseball game, but I think you'll be bored. So I'm going to take someone else and kind of cancel. Or he'd pick me up in his new Corvette and have me sit on the lap of whatever woman he was with that day, kind of thing. So it was pretty bad. He kind of got involved in the wrong crowd, if you can, in your 40s, wine, women, and song. But so that was difficult, especially for my mom raising 3 kids on her own. However, she really was so spectacular that the rest of us just got closer. So it was difficult, but it wasn't, again, what I consider traumatic because the rest of us were so close. And I still felt, I describe, my sister and I weren't close growing up, but my brother was the invisible armor I wore out in the world. He was like the consummate big brother. And my mother was my safe place to come home to. So I was good. Like, I was good. When I was 17, my brother got sick and he died. And I was completely unprepared because I knew he was sick, but it wasn't in my brain. It wasn't, he didn't spend a lot of time in the hospital. I think he did. But for me, I don't really remember that much. I think
at that point?
I was like 16, 17, but I remember him going into the hospital at one point. But to me, that part was fast. But I think he'd been sick for a while. But my mother also wanted to protect me. I think she had seen me go through with my father. And so she didn't let me know how serious the situation is. So I was literally writing my final English exam for high school when my vice principal came in and came to my desk and gathered my stuff and said, "Come with me," and didn't say a word to me as we walked to the office, avoided me completely. And I saw my uncle there, and I knew that Billy died. And I always say that the minute before I heard that he died was the last minute I'd feel safe in the world, because that was what changed my life. That was the first thing, because at that age, you're supposed to feel invincible. You know, you're supposed to feel like you can do anything and nothing bad's going to happen. But here, that whole protective shield was shattered. So I thought, okay, to me, Billy was like the most handsome, athletic, just smartest. And if this could happen to him, okay, well, nobody's safe. I also felt like it should have been me. Like, I felt that the world needed him more than it needed me. I just thought he was a better person than I was. Yeah. So there was a lot of that. That kind of became my mantra for the next couple of decades, was that it should have been me. And so I felt like if I was going to be here instead of him, that I had to earn my place. You know, I couldn't just be average.
So there was it seems like there was a lot of guilt for some reason, right? I mean, is that what you felt?
Yeah. And I don't know, not guilt as far as I should have done, or maybe, but it is this kind of feeling of, why am I here? I mean, I'll tell you this, the day he died. So he was a camp counselor the summer before that. And a whole year had passed, because it was May 28th. And the day he died, the phone rang, and I answered the phone. It was one of his campers from the year before who just wanted to talk to him because he had made such a difference in his life. And I had to say, "Oh God, is your mother there?" And I still think about that. Like, I had to tell his mother, "Oh God," and then always thought about what that conversation must have been like. But yeah, I just felt like, oh, okay, so I have to earn my spot here. And nobody made me feel that way. It was just me. And
were you getting any like grief counseling or family therapy?
No, I think at the time, it was back in the 80s, and for siblings, there wasn't anything. You know, I think my mother was going to a group. There weren't really books. Nobody knew how to deal with me, because, you know, I knew maybe one friend who had lost a grandparent, but nobody. I didn't even know anyone had lost a parent, but I mean, a sibling. So people kind of are uncomfortable with you. So nobody really knew what to do with me. I didn't know what to do with me. And what had happened was, because I felt like I'm not smart enough or interesting enough or whatever enough. Okay, what is the one thing I can control? Because what I had learned was that I can't control, like, my life is totally out of my control. One minute you think you know what's going to happen, and then you find out you have no control. What's the one thing you can control is yourself. And so Billy's death gave birth to an eating disorder. So I thought, okay, if I can't be whatever enough, I'll try to be pretty enough. And to my 17-year-old brain, that meant skinny enough. Plus, it doesn't help that that's the messages we've been getting from society forever. And so I, sort of as an act of rebellion too, I just stopped eating. I thought it's just a way of controlling everything. And that, again, just sets you up for disaster, because You can't think straight. My whole everything I thought I wanted in life. Like I thought I wanted to be an actress. I had gotten into this big theater school right before that happened. I stayed there for maybe a year and a half and just couldn't deal with it. I was great, but it was like, again, what's the point, right? What's the point of having goals? What's the point of having a dream if A, it could go at any second, and B, I started thinking I had gone from being this little girl who thought she could do anything to feeling like I don't deserve to be anything. And that set me up for some, like, life wasn't done with me yet. Life had some more that it was going to throw at me. And I was kind of doomed in a way for a little while.
So the theater school, that was after high school, you went into a theater program, and it sounds like you were still kind of struggling and trying to figure things out, and you had an eating disorder, and then you ended up dropping out of the theater school.
Yeah. And during this time, I have to laugh at it now because it just seems so crazy. Wasn't funny then, but it's so right after Billy died, maybe about a year later, my mom had been living with a guy, great guy, and she married him right after he died, and he was a caterer, and he would, take me to the markets where he would buy his food, and every 2 weeks he'd be gone all day cooking for this big church breakfast. Anyway, about a year after Billy died, he was arrested, and we found out that he wasn't a caterer, but he was a bank robber, and he was wanted for 49. Yeah, see, it's funny now. 49 counts of bank robbery. So he'd been lying to us for like the entire 2 years.
Wow. So multiple bank robberies.
48 yeah, they had a name for him. He was the Satchel Bandit because he carried a little bag with it.
And you had no idea.
No idea. He was caught in the act by a limo driver leaving a bank. Yeah, it's crazy. So that was right after, and then right after that, I'm talking a few months later, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. So it was just right. So that was a really hard, my 17 to 18. That's a lot. I mean, she ended up doing okay at that time. She got through that part of it, but it was a lot. And then starting a new school, and at a school that you're really graded on every semester. They tell you if you can come back. Like it's a lot. You can't hide when you're in theater school. You can't hide behind books. I mean, you're kind of out there the whole time, and it was too much for me. And I was not eating and not sleeping, and but then somehow I got my shit together and I ended up moving provinces. I moved from Montreal to Toronto because I thought, okay, I need a new start kind of thing. And but life follows you wherever you go. So I'll skip ahead just a little bit I ended up meeting somebody and getting married. And
I'll bring you up that point.
I got married at 24, and I wasn't ready. And I think I was also looking for a little normalcy. He seemed normal, everything seemed. So I thought maybe if I do things traditionally, then maybe life will kind of say, okay, she's good.
Can I ask what you were doing for were you in school at that point, or were you working?
No, I was working. I was working. What was I doing then? At that point, I was working at a gym. I always taught dance. So before that, I taught dance. Even when I started when I was 14, teaching dance classes. And so then I started working at gyms.
And were you, so in terms of just your kind of coping mechanism and what was going on at that time when you moved, were you still kind of engaged in the eating habits that you had all of that time, or had that kind of, stopped a little bit, or did you, were you doing any drugs or anything like that? Like, I'm just wondering if you were just kind of doing things to try to keep yourself, heading in a direction, whichever direction that was.
I will tell you that I was never into drugs. I drank, but at that time I didn't drink at all. I actually, when I went into the theater program, that's when after Billy died, my whole life was restriction. So I stopped eating and started dieting, but then I stopped drinking. I was never into drugs. I was always that one kid that watched the after school specials and was like terrified. So that was never my thing. Yeah. But the food, eating disorders take over everything. Like I didn't get into recovery until my 30s. Like it's devastating. So that's all you have room for. So that was how I was coping, I wasn't really coping, but.
Is it kind of like I'll just relate it to me, just sorry, but like, if I start thinking about cake, is it like you start doing your whole life around where you're going to get your cake?
Well, your whole, except that at the time, and I did, and with the eating disorder, I've done everything. I've too much, I've eaten too little. I've been a compulsive overexerciser, belonging to 2 24-hour gyms, working out at 2:00 in the morning, like craziness. But yeah, it becomes your whole life.
Yeah.
It's literally your every thought is what I'm eating, when I'm eating, what I'm going to eat, and then how many calories is that, and then what do I have? It's all, your life becomes very, very, very small. But to answer your question, there were times when I thought, like when I met my future ex-husband, it was me thinking I used to have a problem. There were times when I would think that it wasn't so, maybe, but then it would come back, kind of thing. But I got married, and I mean, I guess it was fine. It was good. It was probably I was married we were together for 24 years, and I used to joke with him and say, we had a good 4, just not in a row. But it started off okay. And then again, there were still things. Got married, moved to the other side of the country, decided to get pregnant, had 2 miscarriages, got pregnant again. And this point, got pregnant again. And my mom, I was living on the other side of the country, but we were still really, really, really close. So we would talk like 3 times a day, and she would call me with her pregnancy cravings because it was our baby and all of that. And then I went in for my first ultrasound, or one of my ultrasounds, and my plan was to fly back home on like that Friday to show her my ultrasound. And my sister called me on the day of my ultrasound, which was a few days before, and she said, you need to come home now. And I said, I'm coming home in a few days. She's like, no, mom's dying. What? So again, my mother tried to protect me by not letting me know that her cancer had come back the way it had, and that she was that ill. I had no clue. We spoke all the time. So I literally flew in, got to see her, show her the ultrasound picture, and she died the next day.
Wow.
And I was 28, pregnant with my first, realizing that I never in a million years thought I'd become a mother without my mother. And being the youngest of 3 too, I didn't know what to do. And I really had to also, one thing, I did get a reprieve during my pregnancies from my eating disorder, because I so wanted my babies to be okay. So I made sure I didn't undereat or do anything. Like, I really took care of myself during my pregnancies. And I have to say, I think if I wasn't pregnant, her death would have really set me back. But I knew I had this person I had to take care of. So I couldn't let myself lose my mind completely. I had to just do what I had to do. And then, but that was, huge, awful. And then I won't get into too much detail, but she actually ended up saving my baby's life, because I almost lost him a few months later. And it was advice that she'd given me before she died that saved him. But that was a traumatic pregnancy. That pregnancy and delivery was traumatic. And fast forward a little bit, and I will say that I got pregnant again and ended up with a really bizarre illness that put me in the hospital for 2 months. Kidney failure, respiratory failure. I was on a ventilator. I was given a 25% chance of surviving. Lost the baby. I had to learn how to walk again, talk again, breathe again. Like, it was crazy.
Was it a virus, or what was it?
It was, I'll tell you this. I woke up in ICU, and I'll never forget this. And my doctor was there, and he looked at me and he said, "You're weird." He's like, "People don't die from this." I had bronchitis and was given an antibiotic, which, before he took anything, because I'd had difficult pregnancies before, I called every doctor, every pharmacist, everything to make sure it was safe. And apparently it was. But when you take an antibiotic, like a wide spectrum antibiotic, it kills bacteria, but it doesn't differentiate what the good ones are and the bad ones are. So it kind of kills everything. And it did that, but it left this one called C. diff, Clostridium difficile, to grow.
About that the other day.
And I think had they caught it, it would have been okay. It's very treatable. But because I was pregnant and because I was high risk, when I said I had pain, they're like, just rest. Like, it was missed, kind of thing, until I was dying, and I had multiple surgeries. I ended up with a tracheostomy. I was the talk of the hospital. This is 22 years ago, and I'm still very close friends with 2 of my nurses back then, because they were one of them won't read my book because she's like, I just want to pretend that your life was perfect when you got out of the hospital. Like, I don't want to know anything. But I did. I got out, and my son at home was 16 months old, and ended up getting pregnant again and having another miracle baby. Now that's one part. Then things took this crazy turn where my husband at the time, he decided, it was right after I got out of the hospital in 2000, maybe April of 2000. My second son was born in 2001. So there's not a lot of time between losing a baby, having the baby in 98, then losing a baby in 2000, and then having another baby. It's a lot of physical stuff, plus what I went through. Plus, it's a lot of loss and all that stuff. But just a few months after my son was born, my husband brought up changing the dynamic of our marriage, and decided that he wanted to open up our marriage in a way. He wanted to start swinging. He wanted me to start sleeping with other people. Now, I'll tell you, he'd brought it up before, and it just wasn't my thing. I have no shame in saying I was never a prude. I was always very in touch with my sexuality. So it wasn't a problem. But I was also somebody who likes the one-on-one. I had no interest in sharing myself with multiple people. Also, I had scars from my surgeries. Also, still dealing with my body image issues, and had just had a baby. So I really wasn't, roaring to be with other people. But at this point, because he had brought it up before, because I had been through so much, I had a therapist, and she may have made up this term, but she told me that I was experiencing traumatic overload. And it's when you just hit, and you don't have time in between to catch your breath or recover. And your body just says, or your brain says, that's it. I'm going to take this off. Sorry. Says, you're done. You can't handle anymore. Like, there's no more. And you almost dissociate in a way. Wow. And I felt at that time, going back to how I felt when I was a teenager, when I felt like I didn't feel like I was worth much, like after Billy died, and trying to find how I'm going to find my self-worth. I felt again that, okay, I had lost everyone who really loved me. I'd lost my armor out in the world. I'd lost my home to go back to. And my partner was kind of making me feel like, as much as I wouldn't have wanted a partner who was super possessive, he had almost just lost me. And there was that part of me that's like, the thought of him sort of pushing me out wasn't helpful. Yeah. And I felt like, okay, so if I can't be loved, like, those days are over. I knew what it was like to be loved, but now I'm not going to be loved. But I guess I can be desired. And so that was when I felt like I served two purposes, which really was being the best mother I could be, because I'd had the best mother. And I really wanted my children to feel that loved and that special. Plus, when you I'd lost people young. My mother was 56. My brother was 21. I almost died when I was 29. And I felt like, I don't know how much time I have. I still feel that way. I don't know. So I thought, I want every memory of theirs to be so good and so big. So I really focused on that. But then as far as me, I tried to find my self-worth through the sexualization of my body, because I thought that's what I was good for. And that ended up causing a problem, because it did sort of take on a life of its own.
Right. Yeah, I got a question. So with your husband, was it a kind of a situation where he was almost telling you and not really asking you to come along? Is that what it felt like? Or
I can't say that, and I will never say that I was forced or anything like that. It wasn't that. It was more that I think because I had. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and the reason why I asked that, and I'm just wondering if he sensed that you didn't want to do that, but he decided that he was going to use it as the excuse to go out and do it himself, right?
Well, yeah, I think that's what. Yeah, I think he'd had these things he wanted to do, and I believe, and I have to be very careful. That, and I say it all in my book, but I'm careful with what I say. I think that there was, I believe he vulnerability there, and really I had nobody to stand up for me, because everyone was gone. And I think he saw a window there, knowing again how much I criticized myself for my looks and my body and how stressed I was about that and the whole body image issue, and I think he saw a window there, and instead of being like, "Oh, this isn't going to be healthy for her," I think he was like, maybe this is a good time. And I can't say I was forced, because there, even though it wasn't positive, it wasn't healthy, I guess there was something that I got out of it in terms of me. I thought that I was in control at some point. I thought that, I felt he was trying to control too much. And then I was like, I always say this, he was sort of in control of what we did and where we went and who we were with. And then I got to a point where I was like, I don't like being controlled. And instead of that rebellious part of me saying, I'm going to leave this unhealthy situation, I was like, I'll show him. And I kind of just went the other way, which was not good for me.
Right.
Yeah. And then it did become a double life. And look, no secrets from him. He knew what was going on. So it wasn't that. It was more from, my kids and from family and from friends and from moms at school and things like that. And so, yeah, it took over for a few years.
Interesting.
So initially it was like, oh, let's have this open relationship, and your reaction over time was resentment, and you took that resentment out by doing other things in your open relationship.
Right. Because you know what, though, and he would even say he wouldn't call it an open relationship, because there wasn't I think in open relationships, you can pretty much, you come back together, but you can kind of do your own thing. And that's not what it was. And I will tell you that I think anyone I know who is in an open relationship too, they'll tell you that it's way easier for the woman to meet people than it is for the guy. And so I he wouldn't have wanted that, because it wouldn't have been fair. It was more that he wanted to go swinging and couple things. And the first thing he wanted me to do was sleep with one of his friends, which was bizarre. And a friend I didn't like, because that felt safe for him, I think. So yeah, I don't really, I don't know how I don't know. I don't get it either. But I think for me, the recipe for disaster was feeling insecure, feeling unloved, feeling unworthy, getting some attention in an unhealthy way. And then it was, I only danced for a few months. That was the dancing was part of the double life, and I was kind of going a bit crazy. But the dancing thing, to tell you a typical day in my life at that point was my kids were toddlers. So the reason why I started dancing actually was I'd met a trainer at the gym who was like, I can get you to look like a fitness model in a few weeks. I was already crazy, like going to the gym a lot and not eating. So I was already fit. But I was like, okay, but you have to pay, right? And for me, this shows you though the unworthiness. I thought, okay, I have to pay for a trainer. I'm not working because I'm home with my kids. I felt bad asking for money from the household to pay for. I wasn't somebody, I would go to the hairdresser once a year. I never got my nails done, never went out for coffee with friends. Like I didn't spend. But I didn't feel like it was right for me to take money if I wasn't bringing in money. So I thought, okay, I need a job, but what kind of job can I get where I'm home with my kids all day? Not typical response. I don't think every mother would be like, oh, I'll strip. So but I did. And so the idea was, so I would be home with my kids all day, and I would be home. I'd stay home to put them into bed at night. And then I would drive to the club and I would dance. And I was the only one there. I still not a sip of alcohol, still not a drug. And all this time, because the eating disorder is so prevalent that it was like, alcohol has calories. I'm not going to do that. Mm-hmm. So I would have a protein shake in my locker. So I'd be like dancing. I'd go to my locker for my trainer approved protein shake, which is crazy. And I would dance. I'd drive home, and I'd get home. I'd have whatever I was allowed to eat, like a piece of boiled chicken and half a potato. I'd go to my 24-hour gym. I'd work out at the gym for a couple of hours.
At night.
Now it's like 4 a.m. kind of thing. I'd go to the 24-hour grocery store. Everyone, and anything that was 24 hours, they all knew me in my neighborhood. Get whatever I needed for the kids. Come home, take a shower, be up with the kids. I would go days without sleeping. Wow. And I wasn't taking anything. Yeah.
No, your husband knew you were leaving in the middle of the night?
Yeah, he was with me. He was home. So, I'd say goodbye. And first he didn't love the idea, but then he liked that I was contributing, because I wasn't saving the money. I was putting it towards groceries. And, but that made me feel good. I felt good that I was contributing.
Right.
Were you dancing in town one of the things, we're in Los Angeles, and there's a lot of people that do exactly that, but they go off to Vegas and then they come
right,
back
yeah.
so that there's nobody.
That would be a hard, long drive to. Well, I didn't do it in. I think there was one club that wasn't too far. I didn't do it there, so I did it. Yeah, it wasn't. Probably about an hour away. Not too bad. But who knows? I'm sure people could have seen me, but less of a chance. But still a chance. But yeah. So that wasn't. But you can only do that for so long, right? I mean, it takes its toll on you. And it did.
I don't know how you were able to get by without sleeping. I mean, that's just an exhausting schedule.
Well, you know what's crazy?
During the day, and
that's one of the reasons,
working out.
To that point, that's one of the reasons why some people start, at least uppers and speed and all that, is in order to maintain that same schedule, right?
I know that side of it blows my mind that I didn't take, and I'm telling you, not a drug, not a sip of alcohol. I think I was just running on trauma. Like, I really think it was just
crazy.
It was just that. And what's funny is, though, it's Zach, that you mentioned that, is that I've done a few book clubs about my book. And there are some things I talk about that did some things I wasn't proud of. And I was afraid when I did my first one that some of the women were going to call me out on some stuff that I did that I'm not proud of. And it was amazing. No, the stuff that all moms ask me is, hey, but how did you not sleep? Like, that was, like, we were exhausted and we were sleeping. I was like, that was the main thing. It's like, how were you doing that? And I was making obstacle courses for my kids and their friends and scavenger hunts and, like, going all out.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something everybody can relate to is the importance of sleep, and, and the fact that, having young kids, it's exhausting. It's just exhausting.
And they were active little boys. But I think, I don't know. I think at the time I wasn't even tired, right? You're just go. But that's a sign that something's not okay. If you're not eating and you're not sleeping, and you don't, like, I would wake up at 3:00 in the morning and go to the gym and think, and I hear people say, oh, I can't fit it into my schedule. And I'm like, well, because you're sleeping. Like, what's up with that? Like, there's so many hours in the day that people aren't using, from like 1:00 until 6:00. What are you doing? Like, who sleeps? Like, it's not, but you're not thinking clearly, right? Clearly I wasn't thinking clearly. Go ahead.
How did, okay, so you only danced for a couple of months. So what did your exit look like from all of that? Was it a kind of a sitting down with yourself, or did you just kind of slowly not show up? Do you know what I mean?
I wish it was that pretty. So the dancing actually, once the dancing stopped, and I still went deeper into just kind of, when I wasn't with my kid, they were a bit older, they were in school, and I just was kind of sharing myself in a way I wish I hadn't. What had happened, I won't get into too much detail, but it was the hardest chapter for me to write, which was, the whole time I sort of, again, was feeling like if anything bad happened to me, that's okay, I deserved it. I really started to feel like I was a bad person, and some of the stuff I was doing, some of the ways I was acting out sexually was a punishment to myself. I was proving to myself that I'm a terrible person, and so to prove it, I'm going to keep doing terrible things.
Wow.
And what had happened was one morning, I woke up, and again, my schedule was, even when I wasn't dancing, I'd get up crazy early, go. This is a long time ago, because we had the big family computer in the basement. It wasn't on my phone or anything. And I'd go down and check my emails and then go to the gym. And I did that one day and went down and found 3 emails from 3 unhappy wives who had a bone to pick with me. Yeah, that's my biggest shame. And that was like 3 major slaps in the face, but I felt I deserved every one of them. And I think in that moment, I realized I'm not just hurting myself. Like, I thought, whatever I'm doing, I deserve. But I realized in that moment that my actions were affecting other people. And I couldn't handle that. That's not who I was, even in the craziness. And that's when I decided to stop everything. And, told my husband. His reaction wasn't great. I won't get into that. You'll have to read that. But it was everything. It did. Stop dancing, stop going to clubs, stop it all, and just really make some changes. And I did. And I went into a program for my eating disorder, like a really intense program, and got recovery from that. And I had been put on medication.
You had any type of therapy?
I'd been through sort of talk therapy, but it didn't do anything for me. This was really like a plan that you have to follow, and if you don't follow it, they kick you out. Like, it was, I was ready also. I was ready to get better.
You need to be ready.
You have to be. I mean, the best program in the world won't work if you're not ready. And I was ready. You know what? Because I had to be away from my kids just for a few hours. I always used to pick them up from school every day. And there were 3 days a week I couldn't do that because I was in this program. And I thought, okay, if I'm not going to be there after school, I got to make it worth it. You know, I got to come out of this.
You're still married?
Still married. And
did the ground rules for your relationship with your husband change at that point, or was he?
Yeah, everything was no, because he wasn't really. I was the one that was at that point. I was the one that was going out for the extra. He really wasn't, getting it. But we stopped. Like I made it very clear. We're done. Like with that stuff. And then we just focused on regular kind of life stuff. I mean, stuff was still happening. I had to have another major surgery on my liver, which was crazy. And so it was still, but the problem was, even though things kind of look normal and our kids are very busy, both were into very high level sports. And so we had that to focus on, and we kind of found our place. However, I still didn't feel worthy of stuff. I didn't feel like I really deserved to ask for more. I didn't feel like I deserved to be happy or to be healthy. And so when I got out of the eating disorder program, I saw when my kids were in school, I didn't like the lessons they were getting at school about health. It was all about weight. And because I'd been through this eating disorder, it pissed me off. And I went to the school and I said, we need to give them another message. And the principal was like, okay, come in on Friday and talk to the 8th graders. And I was like, what do you mean? And I went in with like a bristle board and I sort of talked to them and told my story and talked about media manipulation and marketing manipulation. And one kid told another kid and teacher told them, and all of a sudden I was going to schools and talking about eating disorders and body image. And I created a program called Fit versus Fiction. And at the time, it was like 2007. So Facebook was just starting. There weren't body positivity groups. There was nothing like that. Nobody wanted to talk about it but me. So I was the go-to on the news whenever there was an issue about weight or diets. Wow. I was writing for Huffington Post. I was the one. And that was great. But I still hadn't dealt with the shame that I felt over the things that I did way back when. So it had been a really long time since I'd done anything. But I still lived with this fear of, okay, so what if I'm on TV and somebody sees me and they knew me from my other life, and what if they call this is my brain. Now, what if they call the station? What if my kids find out? Like, horrifying. And there was a time, and I write about this, where I had just finished speaking at a school, feeling great, and I'm walking through the grocery store with my kids, and a man walked through the aisle, and he kind of looked at me weird. And my younger son said, "Why is he looking at you funny?" And look, he may have thought he knew me. He may have been trying to flirt. He could be anything. But my brain was,
uh-oh.
Did I dance for him? Like, really, seriously. And this is like 20 years later. And I'm thinking, or 10 years later, but it's at feet. And I was terrified. What if he says something in front of my kids? And they were in elementary school. And so I lived with that. I lived with the shame of what I'd done with wives, husbands. And so it was, and I still wasn't feeling tremendously loved, by my partner. So, and I was estranged from my sister at this point. So I really had nobody. And I kind of crashed. Like, I kind of had a bit of a relapse with things and thought, how can I be telling people how to feel confident in themselves when I didn't feel very confident or worthy of anything? And it was a really low couple of years until, like, I'm talking low to the point where at one point my kids were in high school, and I was still driving them to and from school, and I would drive them, drop them both off. And as I'm driving, and my marriage was in terrible shape at this point, but they didn't know. And I would drive them. And as I'm driving, I would say to myself, laugh at something, sing to the radio. Like, don't let them know how sad you are. And when I drive back after dropping them off, I always passed an underpass, and I would think to myself, what if I turn the wheel just a little bit to the right? What if I step on the gas? Would it be quick? Would it hurt? Would they be better off without me? I did that for 2 years. And it's devastating, and it's tough. And it was just this really weird, random interaction I had with a woman at the grocery store one day after I dropped them off that changed everything for me. And she saw something in me that I thought had been long gone, a spark. And it was only in maybe 2014 maybe, when I was like, you know what? No, this isn't the end of my story. Like, this isn't it. And I decided to make some changes. And I still didn't leave my marriage for another couple of years, I think. But then when I did, it was the best thing I ever did. And that was just me sort of reclaiming my life. But I have to tell you this, when I did that, I left. By the time I left, I had no idea who I was. I remember a therapist telling me that I was like a puddle of nothing. Like I hadn't paid a bill on my own. I didn't know how to do anything. I literally went into my bank and said, I understand nothing. I have to understand everything. Talk to me like I'm a child. I will not be offended. I mean, I'd never lived on my own, nothing. And I didn't have family support. I had nothing. So it was a big deal, but it was the right thing. And it still took me a few years before I decided to write my book, because that was the turning point for me. I could have only written it once I was ready to forgive myself. And I dedicate my book to anyone who's struggling to forgive themselves for the mistakes they made when they were just trying to survive. Because that's what I realized I did. And as soon as I was able to forgive myself, I was able to put it out to the world.
That's amazing.
When you were finally able to separate from your husband?
46.
Wow.
And never paid a bill or anything.
Your kids at that point?
Ooh, at that point, I'm going to say, let me think. Was that 2016? So 18 and 15?
Okay.
But they were tough on me. It was a tough thing because I was changing. You know, I was saying no. I was growing. I had no backbone for a few years, and I was growing a backbone, and that's tough.
Were you teaching? Were you teaching all the way up until you wrote your book, or still doing the body image stuff and going out there?
Yeah, I was still I wasn't doing it at schools anymore. I was still writing for different magazines, still kind of had my toe in it, but really trying to find my way. I was having, I had the luxury of doing that kind of thing when I was married, because he made a good income. Or as far as I knew. So, but then on my own, so I was bartending, I was waitressing, I was trying to do a whole bunch of different things just to figure out my way. Yeah. But now I write for magazines and do the resiliency coaching. So it's just, when somebody says, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm like, ask me in 5 minutes. I know what to see in 5 minutes.
How was so what was the impact of being able to not just get your book out there, but actually getting it out of yourself, I guess, and putting it on paper and really going through some of the stuff that I would imagine you kind of opened up things that you might not have been willing to admit yourself. I mean, obviously there's a therapeutic thing going on, but just talk to us a little bit about that,
Yeah, it's interesting because it's sort of like there were nobody in my life knew everything, but there are certain people that knew a few things. But even those things, my losses and certain things, I was able to talk about in a way that I didn't feel it. It's almost like, and I heard once it's a way of getting through trauma, where the more you tell your story, the more it becomes a story that you're telling, and it's not really part of you anymore. So that's a way of
We've heard that.
Of going through it. However, when you're writing your story and you want people to feel what you felt, you can't do that. And so I felt like I had these scars. I'd built up the scar tissue, but in order to write the book, I had to open it up and I had to go back there and I had to feel it all. And so I wrote the book quickly. I wrote it in about 7 months, and that's all I did. I just wrote. There were times I wrote through the night because I didn't want to stay in those places for more than a day. So I would just write straight through the night. And you feel it because you're going through. I went through all that trauma in a very short period of time. And sure, it was cathartic, but it was also really, I mean, you really do live through it kind of again and see it differently though. And that's one thing I will say. And I always say to people, even if you don't share it with anyone, write your story, because what I found was there were certain things that I thought I had dealt with. And then when I wrote it out, I understood myself more. Like there were things I still felt bad about. And then I wrote it down. I went, wait a minute. Now I know why I felt that way. Like, of course I thought that way. And of course I reacted that way. But while it was circling in my head, I couldn't really see it until it was on paper. Then I went, oh, okay. And so there was a lot of forgiveness within myself that was necessary. And again, I couldn't have written the book any sooner than I did, because I really had to be at a place where I knew that I didn't know how people were going to react. I was going to be telling people things that I didn't know how my family, my kids were going to react. People I worked for were going to, like, I didn't know how anyone was going to react. And I had to be okay with that. Like, I had to be okay with everyone shunning me, with everyone rejecting me. I had to be, and it's funny, I did get to that point where I was okay because I liked myself and because I understood myself. So if somebody else didn't, it wasn't gonna affect me. And it took me a long time.
I was just gonna ask, did you experience any of that shunning that you thought might have happened previously?
I really didn't look there. Are there people who may have turned their backs on me? Yeah, maybe, but I don't know. Nobody's significant.
Right.
I'm sure there are people, because I've become even more, it was so liberating. It's so liberating because now I say anything and do anything and nobody's surprised. So it was like it was the best thing ever. But the only people who I really cared about their opinion were my kids. And they didn't know any of it. And although I will tell you this too, as crazy as it sounds, I was also ready for them to be mad at me and prepared for that. So I would have been terrible. But my thought was, this is who I am. This is what happened. And if they're mad at me, either for what happened or for talking about what happened, I felt like in time they would understand. And what I say now is that what I realized is the hard part was going through what I went through. That was the hard part. And if that didn't kill me, then being judged on how I survived it, that's not going to hurt me. That's not the tough part, right? And I was lucky enough that my kids were amazing from the get-go. Like, they were just, they were spectacular. No judgment, and they also don't remember me ever not being there because I was always there. That's what happened, right? Because I wasn't sleeping. It wasn't like I was taking off to Vegas for 3 days. I wasn't there. So they don't remember a time when I wasn't there. And I've raised them to just be whoever they are and be in their truth. And so I was never really average mom. Like, even though I did average mom things, I was always outspoken. And so they're kind of used to that. But I will tell you that since I released it, which was about 2 years ago, to this day, I get messages from people who are either they're telling me, how did you do? Like, how can you be so honest? How can you be so honest? Or they're telling me things they can't share with people, but they feel like they need to tell somebody. And even if they don't know me, they feel like they can tell me. And I think it's because, we live in a world where it can feel really unsafe. Like, I feel like there's no safe place. So look, if I can be someone's safe place, then that's what I want to do. Yeah. And so it's been, I have no regrets. Look, I'm not going to say it's not weird when I'll get a message on Facebook from somebody saying, I ordered your book. And my first thought is, great. And then my second thought is, oh my God, I'm going to read it. So I'm always like, okay, you're going to learn a lot about me. because awesome. I just thought if I was going to write it, I was going to write it. So yeah. So I had people saying to me, oh, what if your kids read it? They're not going to read it. They don't want to read that about their mother. They support me, but they don't need to. I don't need to picture it.
Yeah, I'm imagining, myself being in that situation. And that was what I was going to ask, is if they actually read it, because I probably wouldn't. I'd be like, I'm good hearing the story from you, Mom, whatever you want to tell.
Exactly.
I know you wrote a book about it.
Exactly. I'll take your word for it. In fact, you know what? So my older son wanted to know more about what was in it to be prepared if people came to him with stuff. Right. And I told him, and his thing was, well, it's interesting to hear about your parents as people, not just as parents. And it got to a point where I was doing, talking a lot and doing stuff on the radio and writing articles. And I would message him. I think I'd message my kids and be like, okay, I'm going to do an interview. I'm going to talk. And he'd be like, oh my God, just do it. Like, we'll let you know if there's a problem. But just do. You have somebody text us like, just do you, Mom. So, so I'm just doing me.
I love it.
So you're writing articles now. You're an author. What else are you? Are you doing anything else with your time?
Yeah. So I'm. There's a new magazine called Defy, which is for women by women, and I'm the body image expert for that. So I'm working with that and doing some resiliency coaching. And I started my own podcast called How to Ruin Your Own Reputation. That's great. And because that's what I realized I had to do. I had to be ready to ruin my own reputation if I was going to write the book. And it was the best thing I ever did. So I highlight people who are either working at really unusual jobs or living lives that people don't understand. And it's a way of educating people, bringing conversation. So there's more understanding and less judgment.
Love that.
That's
Love that
great.
so much. So how can people find out about the podcast and everything that you have going on and kind of keep updated with you? This fascinating story. It's just pretty amazing. And again, that word resiliency that you bring up was just, it's perfect in my opinion. So where can people kind of, learn more about you and reach out to you and all that?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. I'm kind of all over social media because I'm shameless and I'll dance and I'll lip sync and be my silliness. But I'm on everything from Facebook to Instagram, well, God, even TikTok. And my book, The Good Stripper, is on Amazon or thegoodstripper.com. It's also an audiobook on Audible that I read.
Cool.
And marcywarhap.com for the resiliency coaching. And How to Read Your Own Reputation is everywhere that you can listen to a podcast and watch on YouTube.
Great.
That's me.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Marcy. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, this has been a pretty amazing.
Well, I appreciate you being interested in my story. I know it's not usual or maybe not for everyone. I don't know. But I appreciate the conversation.
All right. Have a good holiday. Thank you.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
10X for Gen XYZ is hosted by Zach Winter and Mark Adair Rios, co-founders of Prosperity CRE, a commercial real estate investment firm committed to providing its investors with ongoing cash flow and building long-term wealth. If you like the podcast, please give us a positive rating and subscribe to be notified about future content. Also, if you'd like to learn more about our approach to real estate investing, you can download a free copy of our real estate investment book, Investing for Cash Flow and Long-Term Wealth, by clicking the link in the show notes below. Thank you and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes.